everyone, and welcome to Book It. I'm Carol Anne Riddell. We begin today with Salar Abdoh, an acclaimed writer and member of our CUNY family. His latest novel is A Nearby Country Called Love. Salar, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me here.
Of course. So as we said, your latest book, it's called A Nearby Country Called Love. Can you just take us through sort of how the story unfolds? It has sort of a shocking beginning.
Yes, it does. Well, the story is really about a variety of people who live pretty much in the peripheries of life in a place like Tehran, Iran. And the main character has come back from the United States, and he sort of falls into the rhythm of the lives of these people. And he becomes very interested and concerned about women self-immolating, women who are, let's say, in bad marriages and have no recourse.
And that's where the book begins.
The book begins there, and then from there it takes off to other places where, in Iran, you can have gender reassignment, and you've been able to have that for a long time. But in a country like Iran, that poses other problems that the book, sort of deals with.
And Isa, your main character, as you mentioned, is amidst all of this grappling with some very difficult family history. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, he grapples with family history. A lot of that I took from my own life, from my family's life.
Yes, I understand that.
My father, I grew up in a family of professional sports people. And
we should say that you grew up in Iran.
And I grew up in Iran. And my father had been a boxer, among many other things. Yeah. We had a club. And my older brother, he became quite a well-known avant-garde theater artist. And actually, they've had a show about his life right here at CUNY Graduate Center at some point, with a documentary of his life. And he was gay, and he died of AIDS quite early on. And the push and pull between these two human beings, one of whom was for whom combat sports was all of his life, and the other one literature and art. And I was always sort of in the middle,
of them,
of that. I loved both worlds.
Yes.
And I always knew that one day I would deal with this subject, and COVID came. I didn't have too much to do, and I wrote this book.
I read that you said in an interview that much of the book is meant in memory of your brother.
And my father, yes.
And
both
your father.
Of them, yes.
But they had a very fractious relationship.
I would say, yes, very fractious. Very fractious.
And much of it, to my understanding, and you deal with this in the book, is around sort of these notions of traditional masculinity. And you deal with that in the book on many levels, including through the character Nasser, who falls in love with another man, but cannot accept those feelings. Can you tell us about this? And this is where you alluded to surgery and gender reassignment.
Sure. One of the characters, Nasser, he falls in love with another man, but he cannot deal with that. He's a fireman, he's a professional tough guy. Like we have people, I have friends who are professional tough
guys, okay.
And to whom you go to and say, look, Nasser, can you take care of this situation for me? And he will. So all of these characters are based on real characters in my life. And then what happens in the novel is that he falls in love with another man. He cannot accept that. Then he decides to force him to get gender reassignment, because the government in Iran actually helps you do that. But not always for the proper reasons, which the book also deals with. And I would say, and also the whole thing we talked about, women's self-immolation. So Isa, when he comes back to Iran, he's dealing with all of these things. And as a man, he's a man who's, he's a regular guy in many ways, but a regular guy who slowly begins to understand, have empathy for other people, for women, for the gay community, for the trans community. And in order to write this book, I spent quite a lot of time with different communities in Iran. So I would say if I was to explain, like describe this book in just one sentence, I would say it's a book about learning how to be a man in this day and age, in the 21st century, where so many things, so many paradigms have shifted, not just in the United States, but all over the world, even in Iran.
You know, we see your characters grappling with gender identity, and obviously this is fiction, but what is it you want readers to take away about modern-day Iran when this book is set?
It's not just about modern-day Iran. I want them, I would love for them to read many books from many countries, and to always understand, this is what I try to teach my students, try to understand the complexities of a place, whether it's Iran, whether it's, I don't know, Ukraine, Russia, Saudi Arabia. The thing I try to convey to readers or in interviews is that it takes a lot to understand any place. I spend a lot of time in the Middle East, not just Iran, all over the Middle East. And what troubles me oftentimes here in North America is that pundits or people talk about a place having never visited it, knowing very little about it, not knowing the languages, and speaking in very reductive terms. I do write essays, but I think what fiction does, especially novel writing, it allows me to really dig into the layers of that society and convey it to readers in the complex ways they need to understand.
I know you have a lot going on in addition to being an author. You're a member of the CUNY family, as we said, a professor at City College. So I'm curious, Salar, what advice do you give your students about writing?
It's interesting. Just last week, the Teachers and Writers magazine did an interview with me, and these were the kinds of questions they asked. Especially they asked about how do you talk. I've covered a lot of combat journalism.
Yes, I know that you have, yes.
And so their question was about how do you talk about war in the classroom, especially in these troubled times. And I had to, you know, I talked about how, you know, America is a country of, I don't know, 400 million people. You're going to get people from all walks of life, from all backgrounds, sitting in the same classroom a lot of times with very different and sometimes antagonistic points of view.
Sure.
As a professor, as a teacher, you have to learn to deal with that. It may not come naturally at first, and in order to deal with it, you just sort of have to try to have the empathy I try to convey in my novels and even in my essays, I try to bring into the classroom. Try to understand the other person. You
mentioned, and I know that you also write extensively about war and conflict. So can you tell us just a little bit about that part of your life?
I spent about 5 years in the war against ISIS in Iraq and Syria, and my last book was about that. And it came out of my long relationship with these documentarians. And I started writing essays about men and women at war. And what I was after when I started to write that, I realized in the news, especially in the Western world, you know, you might read or on television see something like such and such militia or group, and you don't really know anything more than that about them. You know, to the reader or the audience, they're just this entity doing really bad things, usually. So I wanted to understand who these people are. Are they as bad as the news tells us they are? Do they have families? Do they fall in love? Do they cry when their partner dies in battle? So I spent a lot of time with them, and I started to write about them, and then I started to go to other wars and to try to understand Afghanistan, Ukraine, Lebanon, all of these places.
You know, it raises another question for me. Being from Iran and writing about it, are you ever concerned about repercussions for being critical or being vocal, whether that's in a fictionalized way or not?
Yes, it is always something that's in the back of my mind. I try not to be polemical. I don't really write. I have written op-ed pieces for places like New York Times at very critical moments, but I try not to be polemical. I try to write about what I see and not just reportage, but from a very personal point of view.
I know you do a lot of translating as well. And you said something, I read something that you said that was so interesting to me. You said, I want to get other people's voices heard in this great ocean that's the English language. And I thought that was such a unique way to refer to our language. Why? Why did you use those words?
Well, English is an ocean, really, right? And many people around the world either speak it or they want to, they strive.
Or they want to speak
strive
it,
to speak
yes.
it. And one thing that happened that really helped me with this book, A Nearby Country Called Love, once I started translating from Persian into English, and sometimes from Arabic, but mostly Persian, Iranians and Afghans, I noticed pretty quickly that probably 4/5 of the people who would come to me were women. And I realized they had a lot to say. They wanted to be heard in this great big ocean.
Yeah.
And I started translating them. And I've said this in other interviews, when you spend a lot of time, when you translate somebody, you're getting into their skin, into their soul. You're spending time with them. And I really began to understand the issues of women, not just in a place like Middle East or Iran, but around the world. And it gave me pause, and it gave me an insight in how I wanted to write this book.
Salar, thank you so much for all this time. What a pleasure it's been.
Thank you.
Next up, let's head to our podcast studio to see what Isabel Ortiz has for us in Breaking Books.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Breaking Books. I'm Isabel Ortiz, and today I have the pleasure of being joined by author Abraham Chang to discuss his debut novel, 888, Love and the Divine Burden of Numbers. Hi Abraham, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Isabel. The pleasure and the privilege is mine. Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to dive into this book and to hear you talk about it because, yes, it's 888 Love and the Divine Burden of Numbers, but this book was more than just a story about love. It was more than just a romance novel. You talked about identity, culture, and fate, and what pulls us in certain directions. So I would love if you can tell us a little bit about the book and the main character, Young.
Sure. I would describe 888 Love as a literary love story. It's a coming-of-age tale. It's set in the 80s and 90s New York City, and it has a primarily Asian-American cast of characters. So it deals with these themes of mental health and spiritual health, deals with nature versus nurture, free will versus destiny. And the shorthand I have for the pop culture geeks like you and me is that this book is more Breakfast Club than Joy Luck Club. Young, the main character, he deals with a lot of his mental health issues by kind of self-prescribing, and he's using these cultural and also pop cultural references that inform this system of numerology and patterns and systems that he relies on to help him make these decisions, like big and large and small and, minuscule. All through his life, he's been told by his uncle, with some unhinged kind of advice from his family, that there's certain things that you do, certain things you can expect. And one of the pieces of advice his uncle gives him is, remember, you have 7 great loves in your life, and that's it. So make the most of it and don't blow it. Mm-hmm. So it's his sophomore year, he's studying, and he meets this girl, Erina. And, by his count, she's number 6. But if she's number 6 in a line of only 7, what does that mean for me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there is a huge coming-of-age aspect to this novel. You touched on that. Mm-hmm. And we see Young really take a look back on his formative years from when he was in the 5th grade all the way up until he's in high school and in college. So what was that like for you really to have this character be in the present moment but then have to write this whole backstory? Mm-hmm. Are you pulling on things from your own youth when you are writing these flashbacks? Because I guess in a way you have to, it's like you're trying to be kind to your younger self.
Anytime we come into a piece of fiction or piece of art, we always wonder, is the creator inserting themselves into that art. And, you know, I wanted to kind of give the reader a little bit of, you know, a look behind the curtain of, you know, is this author really drawing from real life? You know, how much of this is fiction? How much of this is inspired? You know, I took elements from my elementary school, my junior high school, my beloved Stuyvesant High School, my college years at NYU, but you're telling the truth and you're telling it slant.
Young is a young person in New York City with these like Western ideas, and then he's going home to these kind of Eastern traditional ideas with his family because he comes from a Chinese background. So what was that like when you were writing that? Because I know that you're bringing elements of your own culture into it as well.
Right. So I think a lot of the struggle with people who are first gen or immigrants is that there's this push and pull of, am I X enough or am I American? Or am I X/Y American? Everything hyphenate, hyphenate, hyphenate. And in the end, it's like every person is going to have this dossier on them of, here's this box that I'm checking off of all the things that make me who I am. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to understand that my mom has this background, this point of view, and it's part of who she was coming to the States, and she brings that baggage with her, and what she passes down to the future generations, her children, it's incalculable. Because, you know, Young might take these certain aspects from his mom and process it differently than his baby sister will in the future. Mm-hmm. But in the end, they have to understand that every person's experience, it comes with so many years, and it comes with a lineage, and a lot of that is nature versus nurture.
Young uses numerology in almost every aspect, big decisions, small decisions, and it can be like 888, like the title. That's a great number. 4 is bad. 1, great, right? So what was that like for you to take that part of the, because I understand it's a part of Chinese culture. What was that like for you to write that in this book and make it such a big part of the story?
So again, this is pulling from, you know, different aspects of my life, my personal kind of behavior, and kind of amplifying it a little bit. Because I think as any Chinese person and a lot of, you know, people from the Asian backgrounds will understand that 8 is a very lucky number. If you see an 8's on a license plate on a vanity plate, chances are it's a Chinese person. So all of these numbers are kind of filtered in through that cultural connection and that numerology that you're raised when you're, hey, it's just Lunar New Year. You know, there's 8s everywhere, there's red envelopes, and, you know, all these things that, you know, the main character, Young, is probably seeing from his family. But then he's watching these movies, watching, you know, reading Time Life books and, you know, watching, you know, listening to music and being exposed to Western culture, who's teaching him, well, here's all these lucky and unlucky numbers from this side of the world. So he's putting those two sides of him together, and with his own kind of OCD, he latches onto both sides and says, well, since I'm Asian American and Chinese American, and this is part of my culture and this is my other culture, if I put them all together, doesn't that mean it's even more lucky and even more guidance?
Young, like you mentioned, he sticks very strict to this concept of numerology. But then he meets Erina, and that kind of, his world kind of opens up, and it becomes a little bit chaotic because Erina does not follow any kind of strict rule. She's very open. She's very go with the flow. So I wanted to know, what was it like for you to write her as a character? Because there is this such a stark contrast between the two.
So Erina as a character, again, 80s and 90s film tropes. Like if you know about film, when you are first introduced to Erina, she fits the bill of the manic pixie dream girl, and you are going to assume something that she repeats throughout the book, certain things about her. So I'm hoping people, you know, mild spoilers, will read the book and kind of see her in a different light from the beginning and the end as she develops and you get to know her. And I think as Young gets to know her, because he puts a lot of emphasis on how amazing she is, how she's never met anybody like her. I wanted people to kind of understand that you need to give her a little grace and give her a little bit of room to breathe and understand that first impressions aren't always the same as the lasting impressions.
I wonder, this is your debut novel. Are you working on anything now?
Yes, right now, you caught me at a very good time because I'm probably a chapter and a half away from finishing writing my book 2 ending. And, you're getting a scoop here.
Oh,
So, what I'm allowed to say is it's another literary love story, but it's set in the 2000s. It's not a sequel. There's some similar stuff in there. There might be some Easter eggs, but it's a completely different kind of story. But, I can't stop writing about destiny and fate and what that means. I can't stop writing about what it means to love and be loved.
Well, I am very excited, and I will be definitely keep an eye out for when that comes out. And maybe, who knows, maybe we'll have you back to talk about that.
Please.
But, so thank you so much for being here today. It was a pleasure getting to speak to you.
Thank you so much, Isabel. You've been great.
Now to another edition of The Fine Print. We are talking about comics, who reads them, who writes them, and how they're changing. Joining us is Regine Sawyer, founder of the Women in Comics Collective International. Thanks so much for stopping by, Regine. Glad to have you.
Pleasure to be here.
So tell me a little bit about the market. I know that comics and graphic novels are popular, but is it growing?
Absolutely, especially in the educational sphere. A lot of teachers have taken it on as a teaching tool. So you'll see books in the English department, in the history department, and even in the sciences.
In graphic novel form?
Absolutely.
That's very interesting. So your organization, it's called WINK for short, is really devoted to highlighting marginalized voices in the industry. So tell me a little bit about that issue.
So for the organization in general, we support women and gender nonconforming folks of color working in the comic book industry. We do that by hosting events across the city and the world now. We had an event in India last year, and those events are used to help support the artists' work, to showcase what they do, to showcase what their role is in the industry.
And you are a writer and an editor yourself.
Yes.
So what do you see on a day-to-day basis? Do you see the industry changing?
I do, but just not fast enough.
Yeah.
More women are more comfortable working in the independent sphere. So meaning that they're self-publishing, they're working for smaller companies. Those companies are more open to working with women.
Let's talk about comics themselves, meaning the content. Are you seeing more diverse characters and more diverse storylines?
Yes, we are. Marvel Comics in particular, they have a line called Marvel's Voices. And this particular anthology series will showcase marginalized folks in these various different circumstances in the Marvel universe. And I think there's been a trickle-down effect in terms of showcasing more characters in regular books, in terms of like X-Men or Daredevil, let's say. You'll see more of those characters in those books. And that also extends to DC Universe. You'll see more characters of color, you'll see more women, you'll see more queer folks.
And what's the impact of that on readers?
I mean, they feel seen.
Yeah.
You know, the folks who are queer, they're of color, they're women, they see themselves now when they weren't seeing themselves before, and they connect with the work better. And that also extends into the educational realm where the kids are getting these books in schools, and they see themselves in these books now.
Right.
Specifically the graphic novels.
And really powerful. You know, I know that you're a comic writer yourself, and you're also an editor. So where do your ideas come from? How do you come up with them? I'm just curious sort of about the creative process.
For me, it's just everyday life. I think initially I was a big video game person, and I had an affinity for Metroid, and Metroid had a female character in it.
Got it.
And that started like an explosion in my brain. I said, oh, women can do these different things.
Yeah.
And so from there, I started creating work that featured primarily female protagonists.
Got it.
And that's still like my inspiration.
A last question for you, Regine. So I'm curious, where do you see the comic book industry in, say, 5-10 years from now? Do you think that it will look very different than it does today?
I'm hoping so. I think we'll see more women. We'll see more folks of color that are working and producing books in larger companies. I think the demographics in terms of folks going to shows will continue to change. You'll see more folks of color, more women, more queer folks going to these shows. Well, I think we're going to see a lot more of that.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, Regine. Really interesting stuff. Appreciate it.
Thank you as well. I appreciate you.
Okay. And now Linda Stasi is back with Uncensored. As always, she has plenty to say about what she's reading.
Here's what's true. Everybody hates lawyers, but nobody, except maybe like the Taliban, hates authors. So it's no wonder that so many lawyers take to the keyboard. Most notably, among the most successful lawyer/authors are John Grisham, Meg Gardner, and of course, the guy who's credited with inventing the modern legal thriller, Scott Turow. Legal thrillers are like Oscar Wilde's picture of Dorian Gray. They never age, even if the authors do. Take Turow's latest, Presumed Guilty, in which his famous character, Rusty Sabich, of Presumed Innocent, is now a 76-year-old guy, like Turow himself. He's gone to live a quiet, nice life in the Midwest, but he's taken up with a teacher named B, and things are good until B's son, Aaron, who is black, is accused of murdering his girlfriend, May, who is white. Not only that, but May is the granddaughter of Rusty's oldest and dearest friend. What's a feller to do? Rusty steps into the fray to defend the son. If he loses the case, B will hate him. If he wins the case, everybody else will hate him. He's up against the town's really unattractive prosecutor, who happens to have the very best name ever, Hiram Jackdorp. My God, it sounds like pornographic whiskey. The book is lots of fun, even though it is, in my not humble opinion, too long. That being said, like Wilde's portrait in the attic, legal thrillers are forever captivatingly young. Speaking of all things Wilde, author Louis Bayard's reimagined biography, The Wildes, a novel in 5 acts, is a wrenchingly terrific walk around one summer with the Wildes at a rented farmhouse, followed by the horrific aftermath as seen through the eyes of his wife and sons. Staying at the farmhouse is Oscar and his family, and Oscar and his guests. The family includes his devoted wife, Constance, Wilde's weirdo mother, and one of his lonely sons. There's another son who isn't there, but there's vague excuses about why. The guests include a newly married couple on their honeymoon, go figure, and Lord Alfred Douglas, a spoiled rich young man who bedazzles Oscar. It doesn't take long for Oscar and the Lord to get to rutting around in the attic, as one character says. Yes, another attic. Your Freudian slip does not have to be showing to figure out hiding in the attic is a metaphor for being in the closet. In Bayard's telling, Oscar was in love with his wife, even though he had affairs with men, and she was in love with him until Alfred showed up. Oscar was, no pun, wild for the boy. It didn't go well. Wilde was imprisoned for gross indecency and homosexual acts, and his family had to go into hiding. So the question remains, how different would their lives have been if Oscar had never been famous, or if the mores of the times had been more rational? For Uncensored, I'm Linda Stasi.
That wraps up another chapter for us. Thanks so much for being here. A quick reminder to check us out on our new CUNY TV app and on social media. We'd love to hear from you. I'm Carol Anne Riddell. See you next time on Book It.